Imagine being the only person on Earth who knows the face of a monster, and when you finally speak, the entire world calls you a liar. That is not just a nightmare. That is exactly what happened to her. She looked pure evil in the eyes, somehow managed to slip through its fingers, and instead of being welcomed home with open arms, she was met with locked doors, eye rolls, and a small town that decided she was just desperate for attention. But what if I told you that while everyone was busy destroying her reputation, the real killer was still out there, walking free, picking his next target, and silently thanking the community for doing his work for him? By the time the police finally realized she was telling the truth, the horror had already doubled. Stay with me for the next few minutes, because this is not just a story about a crime. It is a story about how we fail the people who need us the most, and the terrifying evidence that was hiding in plain sight the entire time. It was a hot, sticky Friday night in June, when 22-year-old Megan decided to walk the 3 blocks home from her late shift at the diner. It was a walk she had made 100 times before, past the old laundromat, past the closed bakery, and down the gravel path that cut behind the empty storage units. The air smelled like rain, but the sky was clear and full of stars. She had her keys threaded between her fingers the way her mother taught her, but in a town of less than 2,000 people, where everyone left their front doors unlocked, she never truly believed she would need to use them as a weapon. That belief shattered the second a pair of headlights turned off right behind her. She didn't hear footsteps. She only heard the sound of a van door sliding open, and then a pair of thick, sweaty arms wrapped around her chest, lifting her off the ground so fast that her scream got trapped in her throat. The gravel scraped her shins as she kicked, but within seconds, she was inside the dark metal belly of the van, and the door slammed shut with a heavy, hollow thud that sounded like a coffin closing. What happened during the next 6 hours inside that van, and inside a dimly lit basement 6 miles outside of town, is something Megan would later describe not as pain, but as a disconnection from her own body. The man didn't wear a mask. That was the first thing that struck her. He wanted her to see him. He had pale blue eyes that looked almost watery, a thick beard that smelled like stale coffee, and a tattoo on his left forearm of a snake wrapped around a dagger. He spoke to her calmly, as if they were on a dinner date, telling her that he had been watching her for weeks, that he knew she worked the closing shift on Fridays, and that he knew she had a little sister who waited for her by the window. That detail, the mention of her sister, shattered something inside Megan. She realized in that single moment that this was not a random grab. This was planned. This was a predator who had studied her habits like a scientist studying a lab rat. She was not his victim. She was his project. But Megan was also not the helpless girl he assumed she was. As the hours crawled by and the man left her zip-tied to a rusted water pipe to go upstairs, Megan's survival instinct transformed into something feral. She dislocated her own thumb to slip her hand free from the plastic binding, a fact that still makes seasoned detectives wince when they hear it. She crawled through a broken window in the basement bathroom, slicing her back open on the glass, and she ran barefoot through 2 miles of dense, thorny woods covered in blood, dirt, and tears, until she collapsed on the doorstep of a farmer's house, just as the sun was beginning to rise. The farmer's wife screamed when she saw the ghostly figure on the porch, but she called 911. Megan was alive. Against every single odd, the girl in the basement had survived. But the real nightmare, the one that nobody talks about in the police reports, began the moment she sat down in that sterile hospital room to tell her story. Because when you claim that a monster lives among you, the people of a peaceful town don't want to believe you. At first, it was the sheriff, a slow-moving man named Deputy Collins, who leaned back in his chair and asked her if she had been drinking that night. Then it was the nurse who looked at her boyfriend and whispered, loud enough for Megan to hear, that there were no defensive wounds on her palms, just dirty feet. The rumors spread faster than the truth. By lunchtime, the town's gossip mill had turned her abduction into a lover's quarrel gone wrong, a drug deal, or simply a cry for help from a girl who was known in high school for being a bit dramatic. The van she described was never found. The basement with a broken window, despite 2 searches, somehow led deputies to the wrong house, a house owned by a sweet old man who had lived there for 40 years. The snake tattoo, according to Deputy Collins, was a common design and not enough to go on. Megan sat in her mother's living room, her dislocated thumb wrapped in a splint, reading Facebook comments from her own neighbors calling her a liar. But the killer made one small mistake that everyone overlooked. He had done this before, and he was confident that no one would connect the dots because he had law enforcement fooled completely. While Megan was fighting to be believed, a piece of physical evidence was sitting in a cold storage locker 2 towns over, waiting for someone to care. A single strand of long blonde hair had been found in the trunk of a car 3 months earlier, a car that had been impounded because it was abandoned behind a gas station. The hair did not belong to the registered owner of the vehicle. At the time, it was logged and ignored because there was no active missing persons case in that county. But the hair wasn't just any hair. Microscopic analysis later confirmed it was cut, not naturally shed, cut with a sharp blade, as if it had been taken as a trophy. When a new detective, a young woman from the State Bureau named Detective Rivera, reopened Megan's files 6 months later, she found the connection in less than 48 hours. She cross-referenced the abandoned vehicle's license plate with a van that had been stopped for a broken taillight on the same highway Megan was taken. The driver had been let go with a warning. His name was on the citation. It was the farmer's quiet neighbor, the very same old man who had offered the deputies iced tea when they came searching his property and declared him innocent. The frail old man who couldn't possibly hurt a fly had a son living in a trailer behind the house. A son with watery blue eyes and a faded snake tattoo that peeked out from under his sleeve. And inside that trailer, buried under a loose floorboard, was a collection of driver's licenses, jewelry, and sealed plastic bags containing hair. Some of those bags were labeled with dates going back a decade. One of them, the freshest one, had Megan's name written on it. The truth was always there, hiding behind a badge of indifference and a town's refusal to believe that evil could look them in the face. Megan was not just a survivor. She was the only one who walked out of that basement alive to tell the tale. A tale that nearly got buried under lazy police work and small-town denial. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many other victims are out there, labeled as runaways or liars, simply because no one was willing to listen? If this story got under your skin, drop a comment below and tell me what you would have done differently if you were in that interrogation room. I read every single one. And if you want to see part 2 where we dive deep into the killer's confession and the chilling diary he kept locked in his glove compartment, make sure you subscribe and hit that bell, because you are not going to want to miss what he had planned next. By the time Detective Rivera pulled that trailer apart, the old man's son, a 43-year-old drifter named Wade Holcomb, was already 50 miles away, driving a stolen pickup truck with a sleeping bag in the back and a loaded revolver in the glove compartment. But he didn't make it far. An off-duty state trooper spotted the truck at a rest stop just outside of Clarksville, recognized the plates from an all-points bulletin that had gone out only 2 hours earlier, and approached with his hand on his holster. Wade didn't run. He didn't fight. He simply sat on the tailgate, eating a gas station hot dog, and said 7 words that still haunt that trooper to this day. He looked up, smiled with yellowed teeth, and said, "Took you long enough. I was getting bored." That was the moment the case shifted from a rescue mission to a monster hunt. And what detectives found inside that truck and inside the twisted corridors of Wade's mind would prove that Megan's escape was nothing short of a miracle. Inside the glove compartment, folded neatly inside a leather-bound journal with cracked edges, was a diary. Not a journal of feelings or remorse, but a logbook. A hunter's logbook. Page after page of dates, descriptions, license plate numbers, and hair color codes. Some pages had locks of hair taped to them. Others had small Polaroid photographs clipped to the corners. Photographs taken from a distance without the subject's knowledge. Women pumping gas. Women loading groceries into their trunks. Women walking alone at night, completely unaware that a lens was watching them from behind a tinted window. Wade had been documenting his obsession for over 12 years. And as Detective Rivera flipped through those pages, a cold realization settled into her stomach like a stone. Megan was not the first girl he had taken. She was not even the 5th. According to the coordinates and the cryptic notes scribbled in the margins of that journal, there were other women. Women who never came home. Women whose families had spent years staring at silent telephones, hoping for a call that never came. The interrogation room was small, gray, and smelled like stale coffee. Detective Rivera sat across from Wade, who looked completely relaxed, almost bored, as if he had been waiting for this conversation his entire life. She asked him about the hair, about the journal, about the dates that lined up with missing persons reports from 3 different states. And instead of denying it, Wade leaned forward, put his cuffed hands on the metal table and said, "You want to know where they are? I'll tell you, but I want a doctor. Pepper and a cheeseburger first." That casual, almost cheerful attitude sent a chill through the entire department. This was not a man who regretted anything. This was a man who saw his capture as the final chapter of a game, and he wanted to play it out on his own terms. Over the next 6 hours, with a cold cheeseburger in front of him and a tape recorder spinning, Wade Holcomb confessed to the abduction and murder of 9 women across 4 states over the span of 11 years. 9 women whose disappearances had gone cold, whose cases had been closed as runaways, whose families had been told by skeptical officers that adult women sometimes just walk away from their lives. But they didn't walk away. They were taken, held, and killed by a man who hid behind a quiet, unassuming face and a father that nobody in town suspected of anything more sinister than growing tomatoes. The search teams followed Wade's coordinates deep into the woods, and what they found will forever be burned into the memory of every officer on that dig. Shallow graves, some no more than 2 feet deep, scattered across a remote stretch of forest behind the old family farm. Personal effects, a watch that still had a working battery, ticking away as if time had never stopped. A pair of glasses folded neatly beside a skull. A high school class ring with initials engraved on the inside, initials that matched a 19-year-old college student who had vanished from a rest stop in 2014. As the forensic teams carefully unearthed each site, the scale of the horror became unbearable. And through it all, Wade sat in his cell, eating commissary snacks and asking the guards if the news was covering his story yet. He wanted fame. He wanted to be remembered. But the most haunting detail, the one that makes your blood run cold, is the entry that was dated just 1 week before Megan was taken. That page didn't describe a woman. It described a house, Megan's house. It described the window of her little sister's bedroom. It described the exact time the living room light turned off every night. Megan was not just a target. She was the final entry in a carefully curated collection. If she had not dislocated her thumb, if she had not crawled through that broken glass, if she had waited for help that was never coming, her hair would have been taped to page 47, and her mother would still be waiting by the window for a daughter who simply vanished into thin air. The day the news broke, the town fell silent. The same neighbors who had called Megan dramatic, the same sheriff who had asked her if she was drinking, the same nurse who whispered about dirty feet, all of them had to sit with the unbearable weight of what they had done. Because while they were busy mocking a traumatized girl, Wade Holcomb was packing his van for another trip. And if 1 more week had passed without anyone believing her, the ending of this story would have been written in the dirt behind that farm. Deputy Collins retired quietly 6 months later, never apologizing, never facing any real consequences for his incompetence. But Megan? She didn't wait for an apology. She left that town behind, changed her name, and now speaks at survivor advocacy events across the country. She doesn't talk about the pain anymore. She talks about what happens when we refuse to listen. So here is the question I want to leave you with tonight. How many times have we, as a society, looked at a victim and decided they were too messy, too emotional, or too inconvenient to be telling the truth? How many monsters have walked free because we would rather believe the comfortable lie than the horrifying reality? If this story stuck with you, if it made you feel something, do not let it fade away when you close this video. Share it. Start a conversation. And if you want to dig deeper into the psychological profile of killers like Wade Holcomb, check out the video on your screen right now. Because understanding the mind of a predator is the first step to stopping one. I will see you in the next one.